Sometimes a piece of art is made that sets such a high quality standard, it becomes an archetype for emulation. Or some might say it's so good it gets confused with the archetype itself. Yet when this happens, it becomes near impossible to either replicate that level of quality or avoid comparison. Often, this is because of the unique circumstances which produced that high quality art. It was made in the right year with the right people. It was the right number of limitations and the right kind of limitations, forcing the greatest kind of creativity. It is for this reason, amongst many others, that there is a lot of skepticism surrounding the Silent Hill 2 remake coming out in a couple of months. 23 years on, and the original game is still held up as the standard in psychological horror gaming. One of the big reasons why is because of those irreplicable factors like hardware limitations, budget constraints, questionable voice acting talent, all coming together to force maximum creativity. The result was something that transcends mere idiosyncrasy, something that feels like it came from another world. Thus, any chance that the remake can perfectly recapture or improve upon these circumstances is likely in vain. It's also why the majority of attempts to replicate or improve Silent Hill 2's quality, both within and outside the franchise, have been unsuccessful, and the few that came close could not escape the comparisons. Take a game like Signalis. I'm of the opinion that it is the greatest Silent Hill-esque game since Silent Hill 3. But it can never be better because so much of its imagery and mood are blatantly referencing Silent Hill. The same is true for other great modern horror gems like Fear and Hunger, The Evil Within, and others. With all this said, does this mean it's impossible to recreate or surpass the standard? To escape those comparisons and be archetypal in its own way? As a matter of fact, no. Because I recently came across a game that, more than any other, reflects the psychological horror archetype in ways that parallel Silent Hill without ever seeming like it's trying to copy it. That game is Detention. Detention was the first game made by an independent studio called Red Candle Games, a 6-member team based out of Taiwan. It's a 2D side-scrolling point-and-click adventure game that only lasts for 4 hours maximum. The team was very limited in terms of tech and personnel, but this forced them to maximize their creativity, to make the most that they could out of what little they had. And in doing so, they made a game that instantly entered my top 10 favorite horror games ever. Of all the reasons I could cite, like the puzzle design, its smartly written story, and suffocating atmosphere, the biggest reason is that while the game draws upon psychological horror gaming archetypes popularized by the likes of Silent Hill, I didn't think once about Silent Hill while playing Detention. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Demonic creatures from an unreal world seemingly start to cross over into the real world. In order for this to stop happening, the main character must contend with these forces of darkness in order to discover a sort of liberating truth. And while doing so, there's a crap ton of references to occult imagery and psychoanalysis in the game's environment and puzzles. That is Silent Hill as well as Detention. But yet, I never made that comparison while I was playing. When I realized this, the only reason I could surmise that I didn't make the comparison was because the game didn't seem to be trying to covertly imitate Silent Hill like so many other horror games do. It wasn't trying to imitate the archetypal standard, but instead it seemed like it was trying to be its own thing first and foremost, and then unconsciously assimilated archetypal qualities. By doing this, Detention became a game that, for me, came closest to recapturing the soul of Silent Hill, while also maintaining an identity that, bafflingly, paradoxically, feels very original. Today, I want to provide a non-spoiler introduction to this dreadfully underrated horror game. I want to analyze how it managed this impossible union of familiarity and originality. Oh, and if you happen to be a longtime fan of my Silent Hill videos where I analyze the series' occult symbolism, there's a lot of that in Detention as well, and I will show how deep it goes. Now, Let's get started. The game takes place in Taiwan in the 1960s, during a period known as the White Terror. This was a period of martial law that lasted between 1949 and 1992. It was declared by the country's ruling party, the Kuomintang, or KMT, as a means to consolidate the power and territory they still maintained after losing to the Chinese Communist Party in the Chinese Civil War. They did this primarily by rooting out any potential anti-government sentiment, employing mass surveillance techniques and secret police. It was a dark period, full of unjust imprisonment and execution of those deemed treasonous, and detention makes full use of it in its story. The game begins with a character named Wei falling asleep inside a classroom. When he wakes up, not only does he find the classroom empty, he also sees a notice on the board indicating that everybody rushed home due to a typhoon warning being issued. Though he is confused as to why he wasn't woken up so he could also rush home, he nonetheless takes advantage of the fact that the typhoon had not fully hit yet and looks for supplies. As he walks around the campus, he comes across a girl named Ray, who for some reason fell asleep on a stage in their classroom's auditorium. He wakes her up and tells her that they need to try and escape via the school's only exit, which is a nearby bridge. When they go to investigate, they see that the typhoon caused it to collapse. They also see that the river below them has turned the color of blood. But Wei rationalizes this, saying that a few factories upriver were probably using the typhoon as cover to dump chemical waste. After they go back indoors and bunker down, Wei tells Ray that he will go to the principal's office to try and use the phone, to see if he can contact anybody. Shortly after he leaves, Ray falls asleep again and wakes up back in the auditorium. But behind her, Wei dangles upside down from the rafters, seemingly dead. Though she is in shock, she quickly commits to finding out what happened to him. In her journey for answers, she uncovers a dark conspiracy involving the school and the country's repressive government. The more she finds out, though, the more it seems like reality around her breaks down, crossing over into something one might accurately describe as hell. While aspects of that synopsis might sound familiar, Detention offsets most comparisons by exploiting its unique Cold War setting to the fullest. This was an era when people on both sides of the ideological divide were ratting out their political enemies for personal gain. While the citizens of some countries were fortunate enough to keep their lives despite having their reputations ruined, other countries like Taiwan were not so fortunate. Hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese were imprisoned, with around 3,000 or 4,000 executed, due to either real or perceived dissent towards the KMT. Naturally, there is a lot of dark history to exploit here, and what better place to showcase that history than a school, an institution whose fundamental purpose is threatening to a dictatorship. This gives the dark themes of Detention a greater scope compared to many other psychological horror games which tend to have a smaller, more personal focus. Though we do get to see the dark histories of characters like Ray, amongst others, having that very real Cold War setting makes the game's commentary on the darkness of the human heart all the more palpable. This intersection between the characters and the realities of the Cold War is sometimes addressed through dialogue, like when Wei and Ray talk about one of their instructors supposedly being a killing machine during the war. Other times, it is addressed through the environment and item descriptions. All these references are purposely presented in a non-linear way, forcing the player to piece together what exactly is going on with the supernatural phenomena and how it links back to the school's history with the repressive government. It invokes a very disturbing feeling of disorientation and confusion. And thankfully, it never does it in a way that negatively impacts the gameplay or story. It all amplifies the horror. Now, while the game draws upon the negative aspects of Taiwan's history to strengthen the horror, it also draws upon the very positive aspects of their rich culture, so that the main characters are not only able to deal with that dark period of time, but also the encroaching darkness around them. How? Well, just as Silent Hill's story often drew upon elements of Western esoteric religion, Detention does the same, but by drawing upon Eastern esoteric traditions. Specifically, it draws upon Taoism, as well as a sect of Buddhism known as Tantric Buddhism or Vajrayana. Though most players will likely pass off these religious references as decoration with no inherent meaning, specifically people in the West, the truth is that they all subtly reveal why reality is breaking down and, more importantly, reveal what the main character must do in order to achieve their goal. And best of all, it is interwoven beautifully with the game's puzzles and world design. Before I explain how, let me just say that this game has some of my favorite puzzles in any horror game ever. And it's not just because of their references to the occult. They're fun to figure out, and none of them are overly complicated. There's no equivalent to something like the piano puzzle in Silent Hill 1, or the water tower in Silent Hill 4. They each provide the right amount of difficulty where each time you complete it, you not only feel smart, but enlightened, which ironically is appropriate given the type of religious references these puzzles make. So, what are some non-spoiler examples of this game's brilliant use of the occult? Well, one hint that is given in the game's first 5 minutes is on the wall in this janitor's closet. Wayne notes that it is the Diamond Sutra, a very famous religious text from the Mahayana branch of Buddhism, and also famously the world's oldest dated book. Now granted, the Diamond Sutra and the Mahayana are not exactly the same as the esoteric Buddhism that I mentioned before, aka the Vajrayana. That said, the word diamond will help me make the connection. After all, diamond in Sanskrit is Vajra, the root word of Vajrayana. The Diamond Sutra features the Buddha in a dialogue with a disciple named Subhuti. The content of their discussion centers around developing a mind so saturated with wisdom that it can cut through the illusory veil of reality. The original Sanskrit title hints at this. Roughly translated, it means the diamond that cuts through afflictions, ignorance, illusion, or delusion. Now, how does one internalize that diamond mentality, according to this sutra? Moreover, what relevance does developing that mentality have when you're in the hell world of detention? While there are many interpretations of the sutra itself, the creators of the game have a point of view that is as compelling as it is frightening. The game appears to provide 2 answers. The first is to call out to Amitabha, one of the 5 Tathagata Buddhas whom reside in what is known as the Diamond Realm in Vajrayana Buddhism. Amitabha is featured in 2 key ways in Detention. One is in an early game location where his name is scrawled innumerable times on a wall, and the other more prominent form is with the save shrines. One piece of proof that the Buddha on this shrine is Amitabha is his meditative pose, which traditionally features him with both hands in his lap. The other is the red color surrounding the shrine, which is the color that is always associated with Amitabha. According to the longer Immeasurable Life Sutra, any sentient being in the universe that calls out Amitabha's name, even as few as 10 times, will be reborn in Amitabha's quote-unquote pure land. Each of the 5 Tathagata Buddhas have a pure land that resides within the Diamond Realm of Ultimate Reality, or Dharmakaya. It is the aim of every Buddhist to be reborn into one of these pure lands so they can achieve eternal salvation. From what I understand, it seems like finding salvation through Amitabha would seem like the most convenient path for the sinful or the unenlightened. Literally, all you have to do is call his name multiple times and you will be saved. His mudras, or hand gestures, that he performs hint at this. The conjoined hands signify the union of wisdom and compassion, while this other mudra signifies wisdom being available to even the lowest beings. Based on all of this information, one can reasonably infer detention's subtext. Rei, along with the other ghostly beings she finds in the world around her, are in some form of hell. The spirits that inhabit that hell all deserve to be there, or at least think they do. In their desperation, they build shrines to Amitabha and call his name, but even they are not deserving of his salvation. They are not worthy of the Diamond Realm or Diamond Wisdom. When abandoned by the divine, there's only one other thing that can be done, which is the game's second method of internalizing the diamond mentality: introspection. Where games like Silent Hill 2 facilitate this introspection by contending with monsters that symbolize aspects of the mind, Detention mostly does it by employing divination methods. One is the I Ching. While the I Ching isn't used the way it's supposed to be in the game, instead being used as a small part of a puzzle, its inclusion is very thematically relevant to the pursuit of enlightenment. I will detail one of the most popular ways to use the I Ching to illustrate my point. You take 3 coins and you toss them 6 times. Depending on the combination of heads and tails, you draw either a straight line or a broken line that accords with that combination. A straight line accords with the concept of yang, order, and a broken line accords with yin, chaos. Both concepts are fundamental to the Taoist tradition. After you draw 6 lines, you match the symbol you get with a symbol in the I Ching, which will tell you its meaning. The answer you get will hint at how likely a certain future will be depending on the factors at play in your life. It is then up to you to determine if those factors can be changed. In other words, the I Ching is as much a divination tool as it is a psychological tool. If the symbol suggests a bad future, but also suggests that certain things can still be fixed, it is up to the user to introspect and change those factors. The other example of this half divination, half psychological tool is with the Jiao Bei. The Jiao Bei involves asking out loud a yes or no question, and then throwing 2 moon-shaped rocks, which will give you answers from the gods. 1 flat block and 1 round block indicates a positive answer. 2 round sides facing up mean no, and 2 flat sides facing up indicate ambiguity. Again, the answers received are not meant to be exhaustive, but help the user figure out their own path to enlightenment, their own path out of hell. Again, the patterns are similar between Detention and Silent Hill, at least with the first 2 games. They both involve the protagonist going through an otherworldly hellscape, which they can only leave by engaging in some sort of spiritual practice or self-reflection. Yet Detention managed to avoid those comparisons, at least for me, by crafting its own identity via a wholly unique setting and cultural background, along with a surprisingly original and well-written story full of political intrigue and depravity. On the one hand, it is not at all inaccurate to call it the Taiwanese Silent Hill, but on the other hand, doing so might obscure the high standard of psychological horror that Detention managed to set all on its own, which again was accomplished by a team of just 6 people. Regardless, I hope that future horror game developers will look to Detention and its development as an example, as a standard. Even with a limited set of team members and resources, one can still produce a peak horror game, one that can stand amongst the greats. Did you know that the 5 Tathagata Buddhas were an inspiration for the story of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask? If you want to see the mind-blowing evidence for that, check out the video you see on screen now. I will link to it in the description box below. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button and leave a comment if you have any thoughts on the game or anything I said. Until my next video, I want to remind you as always, and as per usual, stay yellow.